समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There's been a lot of talk between India, Canada, India, US over issues of terrorism inside India. However, there is a more tricky conversation that has now gone on for more than 16 years. And that's a conversation more between India and America. However, it also involves a Canadian citizen. That Canadian citizen, now it looks like, will finally get proper justice because he's likely to be extradited back to India. By this time, you might have guessed, I'm talking about Tahawwur Rana. Now, Tahawwur Rana, it's also linked to 26/11. In a month, we'll be observing the anniversary of 26/11 and feeling really sad that such an awful thing happened. And also that despite so many warnings, there were so many gaps in the security system in India, of course, but also in the US, that people who should have been caught much earlier or about which the US should have warned India much earlier, they got through and carried out this really humongous terrorist attack in India. Now, we know most of the story that David Coleman Hadley, originally Dawood Syed Gilani, right? He changed his name. He took his mother's second name and he went to Philadelphia in 2005 and changed it without any reference to his previous name. So he could, under his new passport, travel as an American to India as well. That's a complex story. His accomplice, however, was Tahawwur Rana. Now, these two, Headley and Tahawwur Rana, were both caught and both put to trial for their role, one in planning a big terror attack on the Danish newspaper Jyllands Posten. I don't know if I pronounce the name right. Jillands Posten. And there the elaborate plot was that Headley had gone and scoped out the area very closely, had made videos, had pretended to be somebody who wanted to buy advertising in a newspaper. You go to a newspaper office and say, I want to buy advertising. They'll give you coffee and look after you very nicely. So he looked around the place and the plan was that they will carry out an attack there, and after killing all the staff, particularly the editors, behead them and throw their heads out of the window on the street so as to make the maximum sensation. That was the plot that was in the works. 26/11 was a plot that was carried out. Now, David Coleman Hadley, Dawood becomes David very conveniently also. David Coleman Hadley was caught not at the time of 26/11, but several months later in the next year, around the spring of next year, while trying to fly to Pakistan from Chicago O'Hare Airport. By that time, he had left a lot of fingerprints and a lot of footmarks. The fact is that he had continued getting caught for drugs all his life. He had continued getting caught mostly for drugs, and then making confessions, then getting a couple of his accomplices caught and a few kilos of heroin recovered. Since 1988, he had lived out like that, and he had become the American Drug Enforcement Authorities' very reliable informant. You know, they run these deep informants. One of them, obviously, is somebody that Shekhar Gupta, also in the Pannu case, Shekhar Gupta allegedly was trapped by. That said, because every time he was caught by immigration or he was caught by FBI, that is David Coleman Hadley, he was let off because of the services he was rendering to DEA. So he was effectively a DEA agent when he carried out or when he planned and supervised. He was the mastermind locally. The masterminds at the ISI and Lashkar were in Pakistan, that is Sajid Mir or the so-called Major Iqbal, but he was the one on the ground. He had visited India 5 times between 2007 and 8. He had made friends in Mumbai that we know about, and he had also set up the Indian branch of an immigration agency that was founded by Tahawwur Rana. That is called, give him full marks for sense of humor, First World Immigration Services. Now, David Coleman Headley, as we know, he finally signed a plea bargain with the US justice system. He has signed plea bargains all his life, and he has double-crossed all his accomplices or partners all his life and got them caught. That's the reason, right through, from 1988 onwards, he's had that talent, and also the US system has had that gullibility. And that's the reason I suspect, I believe, and I hope so, that the US system carries a sense of guilt somewhere there, that look, these people got killed in Mumbai. If he had woken up in time, we would have been able to warn the Indians or catch these people earlier, but because of their own interests, the DEA's interests, and the seizures he brought about were 2 kilos of heroin, 1.5 kilo of heroin. You tell Bathinda police or Firozpur police or Amritsar police, they'll produce 10 times as much heroin in 2 weeks if they got a deal like this, if they got someone like David Coleman Headley in return. So DEA was actually selling out to him for a very small price. The important thing was, who was making his travels to India possible? Who was getting him his visas or working on him getting his visas, and who gave him something to do in India? That is Tahawwur Rana. Tahawwur Rana gave David Coleman Headley this job to run the Bombay branch of First World Immigration Services. That's where he sat as an American citizen. By this time, he had washed his fingerprints and footprints, because he had gone to Philadelphia, applied for a name change in 2005, and once again the system was either complicit or complacent. In fact, in the course of time in 2010, US Director of National Intelligence James Clapper actually held an inquiry into what went wrong, how the American system was so porous or so forgiving towards him, and that report was also forwarded to the Indian government. That said, his enabler was Tahawwur Rana. Without Tahawwur Rana, this was not going to be possible. That Tahawwur Rana, in the trials in the US, they were tried on 2 different sets of charges. One charge was the planned attack on Jyllands-Posten, the Danish newspaper. It also seems, and a lot of people believe it, that the main reason David Coleman Headley was caught in the first place was because of the alert in Denmark, because they knew that something was being planned by way of an attack on that newspaper, because that is the newspaper that had carried the cartoons of the Holy Prophet. So that hit was also being planned between Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Pakistani ISI. When Headley got caught, once again, because he wanted to cooperate now, his usual method, because he had perfected it all this while, immediately outed his Pakistani Lashkar handlers and also his ISI handler. In fact, at one point, he even promised and tried to help the American intelligence. I suspect Indian intelligence must have been a participant in that also, to try and get Sajid Mir to leave Pakistan. That was his Lashkar handler. To get him to leave Pakistan so he could be caught outside. That, however, did not happen. Now, this trial took place for 2 sets of offences. One was the planned hit on the Danish newspaper, and second was the conspiracy to plan 26/11 attacks. David Coleman Headley got convicted in both, whereas Tahawwur Rana only got convicted for the Danish attack. The judge there said that I don't find the evidence adequate to convict him for conspiracy in the Mumbai attacks. However, he was found complicit with Lashkar-e-Toiba, but Lashkar-e-Toiba was also planning that attack on the Danish newspaper. For that, he got convicted. Because of his plea bargain, David Coleman Headley, instead of getting death penalty or a life sentence, actually got 35 years. And the judge said that the judge was doing it because of his cooperation and help in outing all his friends and colleagues and handlers and bosses, and also double-crossing his friend and partner Tahawwur Rana. So in Tahawwur Rana's trial, the most important witness or the most important evidence came from none else but David Coleman Headley. However, he did not get convicted for the Mumbai killings. He was given a 14-year sentence. David Coleman Headley, after the plea bargain, got a 35-year sentence, of which he must serve at least 85%, no paroles. And even after he is released, at that point, after serving at least 85% of the 35 years, which is almost 30 years, even then for 5 years, he will have supervised living. So that pretty much takes care of his life. He was also beaten up once in jail very badly and nearly killed. A US jail is also not a particularly nice place. Those tend to be quite violent at times. Tahawwur Rana was given 14 years and then sort of dramatically released after just over 7 years in 2020. The pretext at that point was that he had come up with COVID. Those were new times for COVID. Everybody was scared. So maybe that was also used as an advantage and he came out. As he came out, Government of India got very concerned because in 2019, Government of India had filed an application for his extradition to India because Government of India was not happy. Government of India had more or less accepted David Coleman Headley because he also appeared to testify in the trials in Mumbai for Ajmal Ahmad Kasab and others. He was also declared by that court to be an informer. So I think there was a sense of resignation that he will not come back to India. However, in the Indian security system, a lot of people are still hurting because they would have liked to lay their hands on him to get more details about ISI operations. But obviously, it looks like the Americans also were not keen, and you can understand why, that he should be handed over to India because he would have then told the Indian side too much. That would have embarrassed not just the Pakistanis, but would have also deeply embarrassed the Americans, with whom he had worked so closely all this while as an informant and as an asset. So there are many who believe that he wasn't just an asset of the DEA, he was probably an asset of the FBI/CIA as well. So really, he was the deep state's deep asset who really got caught in a situation where they could not help him any more than get him this plea bargain. Now, as part of the plea bargain, he also stood in the witness box against his own partner, Tahawwur Rana. Now, Tahawwur Rana, because he was released, India got into a panic that he will not disappear. He's a flight risk. He'll go to Pakistan and then you keep looking for him like Dawood Ibrahim. He will carry on living there forever. Nothing will happen to him. Maybe he'll get a national honor, a big house in Clifton, in Karachi, etc., etc. So India filed applications. It was based on the applications that India filed that the judge again sent him back to jail. He was sent back to provisional imprisonment in June 2020 and has been imprisoned since then. And the reasoning for his being sent back to jail was that he was a flight risk, which he obviously was. Now, since then, extradition proceedings have gone on. In 2023, the first court, that is the basic court which heard his extradition proceedings, that granted extradition to Indian authorities. That was on May 16, 2023, and the judge was Judge Jacqueline Chulijian of US District Court, Central District, California. Currently, he's lodged in Los Angeles jail. Now, his plea was, I learned a new expression in Latin. I know the expression in English, double jeopardy, but in Latin, the expression is non bis in idem, which means not twice in the same, which means if a person has been tried for one crime in one place or one country or one court, the same person should not be tried for the same crime in the second place. India-US extradition treaty signed in 1997. All treaties are complex. It says that for extradition, a crime has to be criminally chargeable in both countries, right? So something may not be a crime. Gold smuggling, for example, for the longest time wasn't a crime in UAE. That's how Dawood Ibrahim ran his business from there, but it was a crime in India. So for extradition, something has to be a crime in both countries. And if it's a crime in both countries and you've been tried in one, should you be tried in the second also? That's the plea that Tahawwur Rana took. But the judge said that the evidence that India has, that also in fact, one judge also looked at historical references, history of whatever had happened, and that was the appeal judge, Milan D. Smith. He said plain terms so far and historical context say that he should be extradited. Now, his extradition has gone through every other process He has an appeal at the US Supreme Court. As things stand, only odds are very poor. Only 2% of the appeals against extradition are even heard at the US Supreme Court. And this is not infinite. This is not the tariq pe tariq business. US Supreme Court has to finish this in 45 days. So chances are that by December, unless he finds some other way of delaying it by some more time, chances are he'll be coming to India. And in this case, this will be a terrorist, a convicted terrorist, convicted for terror planning, terror conspiracy in a European country, now going to be put on trial in India, and remember, of Pakistani origin, but a Canadian citizen. So a Canadian passport holder. So Canadian connection is also there. Now, we need to know a little bit more about Tahawwur Rana, who Tahawwur Rana was, and how did these two characters, Tahawwur Rana and David Coleman Headley, came together. These two were born in the same year, 1961. They were born in the same year, and as luck would have it, went to the same school. And this school is a bit like a military school, or maybe the Pakistani equivalent of what we have in Dehradun, Rashtriya Indian Military College, RIMC. In fact, the graduates of RIMC proudly call themselves Rimkolians. It used to be the Royal Indian Military College. So Royal became Rashtriya. That way, all your emblems and all your stationery and all your signboards, etc., did not have to change. So an equivalent of that in Hassan Abdal in Pakistan, where lots of Pakistani military academies are located, as they are in Dehradun in India, a school was set up called Cadet School. Cadet School Hassan Abdal was set up in 1952. It's like a prep school from where graduates after class 12 equivalent go to civil services, go to diplomatic corps. Many go to the army as well, not very different from RIMC in India. It's a very elite school. Now, that is where David Coleman Headley, then as Dawood Syed Gilani, because soon after he was born, his father and his mother split. His mother used to be a secretary in the Pakistan embassy in Washington. So his father and his mother split. His father came to Lahore. Both the boys, he and his brother, were growing up in Lahore. He was sent to Cadet School Hassan Abdal, and that is where he met Tahawwur Rana in Cadet School Hassan Abdal. So they go back that far. They go back to school and they became friends. Then their lives took different directions. David Coleman Headley, in the course of time, did not like Pakistan very much, right? Because he was a Westerner. He was also confused for a foreigner. He also had what is called as heterochromatic eyes. His eyes had different colors, right? So he decided to go back to America, and his mom, his biological mom, made it possible for him to go to America. And he started running her wine bar and also her pub in Boston. And that is where he spent quite a bit of his life. In the course of time, he became more American in his accent, in his lifestyle, etc., etc. It's only later when he came back to Pakistan that he got radicalized, got in touch with Lashkar-e-Taiba, and began to look at himself as a Muslim. So he really wanted to carry out these attacks in India. He had also scoped out Bhabha Atomic Research Center in Mumbai. He had later, after 26/11, had also scoped out National Defense College in New Delhi, and had also planned an attack on a meeting of Indian defense scientists in Mumbai. Earlier, all of this came out in his interrogations and also in his court proceedings. However, in all of this, Tahawwur Rana was an accomplice, or you might want to say alleged accomplice. But I think some of this has already been proven in the US Court of Law. The only thing that wasn't proven was that he was key, or he was a player in the specific conspiracy to carry out the 26/11 attacks. Now, Tahawwur Rana followed a different direction. David Coleman Headley started out being Dawood Syed Gilani, became David Coleman Headley, then in his heart became Dawood Syed Gilani, became a Muslim and a Pakistani. And in fact, he got disillusioned with the ISI and Lashkar-e-Taiba when they said they wanted to delay the attacks on the Danish newspaper, because he really had some passion about doing that. And that's around time, maybe he made some indiscreet calls, etc., because FBI had been tracking him. That is around time he got arrested. Tahawwur Rana went in a different direction. He actually became a doctor. He became a doctor. He went to the army, became a doctor. Even now he's called Captain Dr. Tahawwur Rana. He served a tour of duty in Siachen, where because of high altitude, he got pulmonary edema. That's how he wanted out of the army. However, it looks like he deserted from the army. He ran away from Pakistan and ran where? Where do people desert from our countries when they really want to hide someplace? He went to Canada, the so-called promised land of characters like this. So he went to Canada, but he wasn't doing medicine in Canada. His wife is also a doctor. He wasn't doing medicine. He set up this immigration agency. And you know what these immigration agencies that work in the subcontinents, what kind of business do they do? So he built a business like that. And in the course of time, he and Dawood Sayed Gilani, I don't know what was his name at the point when they came back in contact. They came back in contact and he started working with him. And then we know the rest of the story. Now, he claims that it was in this process that David Coleman Headley, I will keep using these names interchangeably, David Coleman Headley introduced him to the so-called Major Iqbal. I'm sure that isn't his correct name or correct rank either. That he introduced him to Major Iqbal of ISI and also Sajid Mir of Lashkar-e-Taiba to help him with various things, mainly to help him come back to Pakistan. It's possible that the Pakistani army had declared him a deserter. We don't know that. However, I'll be more inclined to buy the argument that he was always an ISI sleeper sent out to Canada and given this cover and the pretense that he was a deserter from Pakistani army. Nevertheless, he's the man who will now be, hopefully, I hope there is no last minute glitch, he will be coming back to India. And when he comes back to India, then the trial will begin and this whole story will acquire new wings and more new revelations will come out. I know Indian investigating agencies cannot wait to get their hands on him. They've been able to interrogate some of these characters overseas in the US, including David Coleman Headley, who, as I told you earlier, was quite happy to double-cross all his colleagues and comrades, right? Tahawwur Rana, however, will be a different prospect because he is Pakistani, former Pakistani army, then Canadian citizen, complicit with an American citizen in carrying out one of the most significant terror attacks in world history and definitely the most significant terror attacks in India. So what happens now? We will use our usual line, watch this space.